What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome. I am excited to have you. The Beyond UX Design shop is open. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop to pick up some big, beautiful art prints of some of my favorite UX and software related quotes, or pick up some digital downloads and print them off yourself. Pick up your copy of Beyond UX Design, Master Your Craft, Beyond Pixels and Prototypes. Get free shipping on all orders over $30. And use the code LISTENER to get 10% off your entire order. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop and get your print on. This week's episode is brought to you by Wix Studio. If you're thinking about redoing your portfolio or kicking off a new website project, listen up. I only have 30 seconds to tell you about Wix Studio, the web platform for agencies and enterprises. So here are a few things that you can do from start to finish in 30 seconds or less on Studio. You can adapt your designs for every device with responsive AI. You can jump seamlessly between front end and back end, speed up projects with an AI code assistant. You can start a design library. You can reuse full stack apps and UI components across multiple sites. Well, time's up, but the list keeps going. Step into Wix Studio and see for yourself. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/Wix to start creating today. This week's episode is brought to you by Jeff White and his UX Storytelling Toolkit. Now, lots of people talk about the importance of storytelling, but Jeff brings actionable clarity to storytelling, and he shows you exactly how to do it. He breaks down different real-world scenarios, like how to use storytelling methods to present your work to clients and stakeholders, how to craft a better case study, and how to prep for interviews. And I love Jeff's approach to storytelling here. It's not your simple once upon a time kind of stuff. And since you're an amazing listener, and I know this course will help you so much, I'm stoked to get everybody listening a 10% discount if you use the code BeyondUX when you check out. So head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/storytelling. Use the code BeyondUX to get 10% off Jeff's course. Learn some incredible techniques to influence your team and advance your UX career. And if you haven't done already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That would help me out so much. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Ryder, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, and Marty for all their support. And if you want to join these fine folks and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you'll get rough transcripts and exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. You get instant access to the video archives right now for as little as $5 a month. And for more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then for the love of God, tell your mom and them about it. So UX designers, if you're paying attention to anybody on social media, you're going to hear constantly, you got to learn the business. You got to learn business. All the designers, we got to learn business. Nobody wants to learn to code anymore. Now everybody wants to learn business. But what does that even mean to learn business? And how do you learn the business if you aren't building relationships with your team? So I'm so excited to have ԻníOlúwa Abíódún on the show today. She has got a lot of experience dealing with this, learning the business. She ran her own business for a long time, which I think helped. But she's really interesting, and we're going to talk to her all about that today. I'm so excited. ԻníOlúwa, a lawyer turned designer from Nigeria. That's a first, by the way, a lawyer turned designer. I haven't seen too many of that. Is a principal product designer working in growth at Gen Digital, a leading global cybersecurity company. There, she crafts delightful product experiences to turn users into loyal paying customers. And before that, she led growth design at a fintech startup. She has collaborated with startups. She's collaborated with startups and corporations across various sectors, including e-commerce, HR tech, and B2B SaaS. She's dedicated to mentoring designers through platforms like For Creative Girls and ADP List. She shares her knowledge globally as a guest teacher at Azari Women in Tech 2023, a TEDx speaker in Nigeria, and a guest lecturer at the Stadio School of Design in South Africa. And outside of her day-to-day, she co-hosts the Growth Design podcast, fellow podcaster on the show, getting interviewed today for a change, interviewing design leaders from Adobe, Miro, Zoe, and ClearLeft, among others. A 2024 Coho Fellow in Design Leadership and a Mandela Washington Fellow. ԻníOlúwa lives in London with her husband and their daughter. ԻníOlúwa, welcome to Beyond UX Design. I am so excited to have you on. How is it going?
Hi, Jeremy. This is a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. So I know I read that little bio real quick, but you've got such a fascinating backstory here. You didn't mention your bio, but you make you're clothing designer as well. Super fascinating stuff. Tell us a little bit about you. And how did you go from? We could probably talk for an hour just about this, but how did you get from go from a lawyer to design?
Okay. Oh my gosh. All right. It's going to take us back.
Loaded question, but
A
sorry.
decade. Okay. Right. So my journey obviously starts in law, and I recall just being 15 and in my first year of law, just completely out of my depth, totally. And I spent most of my days sketching my way through classes because at the time I'd sort of like to imagine, I don't know if you or if our listeners are aware of Archie comics. That was like my
Hmm.
little, yeah, that was my pleasure, my guilty pleasure back then. And I would imagine I was a stylist for Veronica Lodge, traveling around the world, just dressing her up. So I'd make all these clothing sketches of things that she could wear, basically. And this was my favorite pastime in my law classes. I did not fail law, thankfully, but somehow during my second or third year in in university, because for us it was 5 years of uni, and then you go to law school for about 9 months. So my second year, actually, a friend of mine had seen a sketch and wanted to wear this outfit to a faculty dinner that she was attending. And somehow we brought this dress to life together, and she wore it, and orders began to pour in. So I became an accidental business owner, and
That's
suddenly
awesome.
I had this business, and I was a law student, so starting to juggle clients from my university residence, and still having to figure out my schedule with law classes. But thankfully, the more senior you get, so like by your third year, fourth year, and fifth year law, your class load reduced drastically. They just got like very heavy reading that you had to do, which just meant that I had more time to, yes, study, but also dedicate towards building this business that I'd become so passionate about. And so I did that in tandem. And in my final year, I remember just like I'd seen this competition, it was a national fashion competition, and I made the sketch, sent it in, and went back to studying for my final law exams. Got the call. I'd made it to top 10 just based off of the sketch. Now it's time to bring this dress to life, to dress this A-list actress. And it was sort of like her
That's amazing.
triumphant. It was sort of her triumphant return to the red carpet after taking like this hiatus to go have a family, and ended up just creating this dress, made it from top 10 to top 5 to top 2 to the winner. Dressed her. She wore it for AMVCAs, which is sort of what we call Africa's Oscars, because it's
Hmm.
that on the
Yeah, that's
continent.
so cool.
I know it was completely surreal, to be honest. She wore this, and definitely that had a massive impact on the business. And I still just had to keep juggling both law and fashion ultimately. But eventually, I got to a point where the business had grown, and I'd sort of grown up over the course of 5 years, and I'd been thinking about the future, like when I do have to dedicate 9 months of law school, what will happen when I cannot give that 100% focus. And I'm grateful that even though I was quite young when I started the business, I had that fortitude to sort of put those plans in place. So when I did go off to law school, the business did not shut down. Things ran on. There was an ops person who sort of took care of things, and I just offered more of creative oversight while I was in law school. So yeah, that's sort of the story with that.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, right on.
Yeah, and then from sort of bring us into what's the word now? Into today,
Hmm.
basically how we got here. I eventually got married in 2017, sort of. But off and on, fashion had sort of trended into graphics and illustrations design for me. So I was taking that on the side. So my side hustle had a side hustle, basically. And I was taking
Wow.
those like clients because it just meant the progression made sense. If I was making a wedding gown for a client, it then extended into, hey, I could illustrate your entire wedding invitation. I could help you work with the printers,
Yeah.
get these
Yeah.
printed invites out. And so, yeah, the natural progression made sense. So I dabbled into that from like 2015 and began graphics design. But then got married, shut down the business, moved to South Africa. It was a hectic one making that decision. But
God, I bet.
yeah, but ultimately went to fashion school in South Africa. And what that meant was I then had 2 years to sort of focus on the study of it, which actually turned out to be more hectic than law school, surprisingly. The program
Really?
was it was rigorous. My goodness. We delved into so much theoretical understanding of fashion history, fashion theory, understanding trends and the way the world works, understanding supply chain, value chain. It was very thorough. In my second year, I fell in love with graphics design. I got this book from the school library, and I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And that sort of helped me make that full transition. The pandemic happened in 2020. Fast forward till then, I'd got into an MBA program because at the time I still thought, you know what, yes, I have this design thing I was doing on the side, but I still want to chase fashion, maybe then think about it from a management point of view, really dig into the business side. I got into that program in London, and a couple of weeks before our flight, lockdown was announced. So that meant that opportunity went down the drain very
Mm,
quickly.
yeah.
But that year also was an introspective one for me, because then I could turn all of this attention inward and decide for myself what path I really wanted to focus on. And design easily rose to the top, as one does, never making small plans. I decided I was going to start a design agency. So yes, voila, started the agency. And but I think a big lesson from my initial business days was realizing that there were certain things I was strong at, and there were certain things that it was best to always bring someone in quickly. So the first hire I will always make is an operations person, someone who gets the gist of how things work and all of those, just the day-to-day operations, and then the overview of it, thinking about the future, and just gives me space to live in my creative bubble, basically. And bringing that was a fantastic decision. Once again, handling client communication, scheduling, handling all the in-betweens, so I could be creative with our client. And that grew very quickly as well, because by 2021 we had a very, like, nearly six-figure revenue grossing business
Damn.
within the
That's
space
awesome.
of a year. Yeah, so it was fantastic. And then once again, as one does, we moved to the UK, left South Africa,
Always up for a challenge.
you know. Left South Africa, packed everything up, moved to the UK, shut down the agency. Oh, and the agency at this time had grown to a team of about 4 or 5 people. Sort of closing that down was bittersweet. Then came to London and thought, you know what, this is the fashion capital of the world. I have now done this design thing off and on at this point for about 5, 6 years. What if I gave it a go and just full on focus on it? And it took a few months, but eventually got a job as a senior brand designer at a fintech in central London. And my main task was rebranding the entire business, which took about 6 to 8 months to sort of get through. But we found our footing, and my work just naturally evolved. At some point, my manager was like, "You're such a strategic thinker. I want you to read this book, Design Driven Growth by Molly Norris Walker." I read that book and I was like, give me more now. I want more. What is this? And it was just that intersection of business and design, which was so eye opening for me. And it felt like everything, all of my experience sort of came to roost in this fine place, middle, basically. And I was lucky enough to be part of the first cohort of the growth designers community course, which just sort of solidified growth design and this world for me. And ultimately, from there on, it's just been nonstop taking in knowledge and building on it. And yeah, it's been fantastic.
I love it. All right. So you are one of the best people to probably talk about then the business, quote unquote, the business for UX designers. I want to, like, before we even get into all the other stuff, we had an outline, and as we're talking, I'm like rearranging the outline. So I
Okay.
hope that's okay.
Yeah.
But before we talk about the other stuff, I really want to just understand when someone says, UX designers need to learn, quote unquote, the business. Tell me from your perspective, like, what does that even mean? Because it's such a nebulous thing. Most designers, especially people going through boot camps, they think about process flows and artifacts and empathy, all this stuff. And the last thing they're thinking about is, quote unquote, the business. So what does that even mean to you?
Gosh, okay. So, yes, because I have run my own businesses, it's by extension become easier for me to have empathy for whatever business I go into by default. Because there are two things, right, that happen. It is the reason the company exists is the customers, the users, and the reason that the users are sort of staying with the product is also because of what the company provides for them, the problems that the company is solving for them. So it's like a cyclical relationship, basically, like it's symbiotic. When we talk about understanding how a business works, I think It is something that I believe strongly is important for our personal growth and development as designers. At the very least, no one's asking you to honestly become a business designer and dig into the world of that, but there are certain foundations that understanding that can also be very impactful in how you begin to think about the company's relationship with users. So for me, my business understanding, like I said, at its foundation comes from my own experience of building both the fashion business out of like my university residence and building that into an entire floor of a building. You don't have to be a business person to develop empathy for the business, basically. That's what I'm trying to say. Now,
Yeah.
developing that business empathy, which is oftentimes when they say learned business, it comes from understanding business functions. And it's not just internally about how the different stakeholders and how the organization stacks up. Not necessarily that. It's more about how do we begin to explore questions around the value chain of your company. Like there are a ton of questions that you can start off with trying to understand yourself. So like, first of all, what is the funding status of this business? What is our revenue model? How do we make money, basically? And right now, depending on how your company works, when there's an all hands, do they talk about the revenue estimates? How much money have we made over this period of time? And what does our revenue trend look like? Are we making money, or are they talking more about how we lost money last quarter compared to the previous, and it just seems to be a downward trend? And then when you look out beyond the just this business, what does the market look like in this space that we play in? Is it something that other people are actually profitable in, or does it look like everybody's losing money staying within this sector? What are the biggest contributors to profit when you look at it, or the biggest contributors to loss, which can be a very personal decision depending on the founders, right? But then who makes up our user base? Who are our direct competitors? What are the competitive advantages that we have over them? What are our products? But then people oftentimes then stop at what are our products, then go on to features and benefits. No, it's not about you. Think wider than that. How do these products get made? If they're physical products, who are the suppliers of these products? Are there raw materials that are being used? Who does our company depend on to be able to make a single unit of our products? Are there wholesalers that help us with selling this? Are we just in between? And then you can begin to think about what are the features, what are the pain points we solve for, what are the price points that we're offering this for, what user problems are we solving for, who is the target group, what do the reviews about our product say? Because then you also don't want to get bogged down working in a place where the reviews are just utterly terrible and nothing changes quarter to quarter. And then what's the general appetite for risk in the market? Does it look like there will be innovation in this? Are there possible things like the technological trends? And this is why we're saying that I do thank my fashion degree a lot, to be honest, because one of the things that I learned was also being able to evaluate things based on what we call a steep structure. Basically, you're looking at the social factors that determine the trends within this business and the market and space you play in, the technological evolution that are coming to fore in that market, looking at the economic factors, and then you're looking at there's another E, and then finally the political factors, right?
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, so it's STEEP. So you can look that up if you're listening. I forgot an E, but these are some of the things that you should consider, and these are the things that helps you begin to understand if a business is pricing its products at this certain point. Is it because of how much of it comes from the cost of producing that, or how much of it comes from, quite frankly, the advertising we have to pay for that contributes to our final price? There's so many ways you can come at it with understanding the business. No one's asking you to suddenly become this guru who knows the ins and outs of every financial detail. But all of the things I've mentioned now, if you can answer those things about your business, then prioritizing as a UX designer, as a product designer, prioritizing what's best for your users would also then come from a place where you are very informed, because now you're able to balance, all right, yes, this is in the best interest of the users, but then at what cost to the company as well? Because if the company goes out of business, then another company is just going to come and take our place in the market, right? And then I don't have a job, and then layoffs happen, and then so many ripple effects.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's yeah.
So
Okay.
you said something that is really important, and I want to just highlight this. It was the first thing you said: empathy for the business. So we talk all the time about empathy for users and empathy for this, but like how often does anyone on a UX designer ever really think empathy for a stakeholder, empathy for the CEO? And, let's be fair. It's hard to quote unquote build empathy for someone making like 18, 20, 30, 50 times your salary flying on private jets in first class. But when I say empathy, it isn't for that person. It's for the role. It's for the people that are doing the work. It's for when they're making decisions, empathizing with the decisions that they're making and how your role can help them. Right. When you think about that. And so that's something just really important. And I don't know if you want to dig into that a little bit, but empathy for the business. I want to hear, we talked a lot about like business stuff. You have an MBA. I don't think you have to have an MBA to be able to empathize with the business. Tell me a little bit more. Dig into that a little bit. Empathy for business. Let's talk about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I mean, the easiest way that oftentimes today it's more a case of chasing KPIs and metrics and all of these things. And I see how there can be a disconnect within for designers when you do not particularly understand why this is the organization's objectives. When you take that one step down, this is how it trickles into the metrics or the goals that the company is working towards within a quarter. When you take that down, this is how that influences the product metrics. When you take that down, this is how it then affects design. There's so many steps and layers to this, right? And it can often feel like, okay, why are we chasing these metrics? Why are these KPIs important? But then once again, this is where I said, like, depending on your company, I think I've been fortunate at least to work in places where it does feel like this is the norm. But I want to also be mindful that not all companies work the same way. Where when I was at a startup at the fintech, our all hands was more two ways where things happened. We would have those all hands where the CEO directly was sharing all of these details transparently with us. We were going over, there were so many acronyms I picked up and I just note them down, like, okay, what is EBITDA? What is this? Like so many things, and just noting those things down and going later on to sort of work my way through it, trying to understand that. And then there are other things around where I was fortunate to also be the one to design our quarterly investors update. So I'd be working directly with the CEO and the CFO. I mean, the CEO was smart as a whip, and it look at a certain set of numbers that another member of the team's provided, and you'd be like, oh, there's something wrong with that calculation. And it's like, oh no, that doesn't look right. And I'm talking, he's able to like 6-figure calculations in his head, and I'm just like, but then the point for me was the curiosity to ask, and I'm glad that between him and the CFO, they took the time to actually answer those questions. And I'd be like, why is that wrong? This is where I was learning, like, LTV over CAC. Why is that a problem when one side is high and this other side is low, right? Beyond all of this, it's easy for it to be reduced to that. But beyond all of that, there are two questions that are sort of tied together that I always ask when it comes to business empathy. Who is my success, my role, success in my role? Who is this dependent on? And whose success is dependent or tied to mine? That's the quickest, easiest way to begin to understand and gain some business empathy, right? So if I know that this team, for them to succeed, I have to fulfill XYZ, that helps them. But then for me to succeed, I need XYZ teams to fulfill ABC in each of those. Then it becomes imperative then that I begin to figure out those relationships and those connected dots, right? And gradually I can begin to understand how my role does not exist in isolation, one. And two, our success still trickles back up into this company goals, right? And then ask the questions around that. So if you get these KPIs, you get these metrics, and you do not be shy of asking, where does this ladder up to? What is above this that I'm not saying? Yes, it's the company goals, but things like, what is the North Star metric that we're tracking as a company, and why is that important to us? So someone comes to you and says, oh, we're prioritizing organic growth. As a result of that, on the growth team, we're going to be focusing on referrals, or we're going to be focusing on freemium, free to premium users. That's the priority. Don't just say, okay, great, let's start the research. It's more of a perspective of, great, growth. What's happening? Why is organic growth the priority right now? And I had one of those projects at the fintech where it's like, okay, yes, organic growth is a priority, but then why is that a priority? And then began to realize very quickly it's being prioritized because we needed to cut down on our cost of acquisition. Okay, why is that a problem? Because when that keeps going up, it affects our total OPEX. Our operating expense keeps going up. Why is that priority? Because if our OPEX goes up, there is no money for anybody in the business.
Yep.
That is how
Yep.
you begin to ask those laddering up questions to understand how things tie together. Nothing exists in a vacuum within a business.
I love this. So that you were touching on something near and dear to my heart, and this is something that I say all of the damn time, and you were hitting on exactly why this is so important. You cannot build great software without great relationships. And everything that you've just sort of said, it's like, how do you even begin to do those things if you have never talked to the people outside of your direct core UX team? Right? If all you're talking to is your manager, you are never getting those insights. If all you're waiting for is the senior lead UX designer to tell you what to do, there is no way you are going to be building within the correct context. So I'm curious from your perspective, right? All of these things that we're talking about, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you can't figure these things out without the conversations with the larger team beyond the design team, maybe even beyond the software team. So I'm curious from your perspective, how does one go about finding those people, building those relationships so that you can get those insights in order to be truly effective? What do you do?
I love that. There are two ways I'll approach this. On one hand, I do want to say that this is why I love working in growth, honestly, because it means that there are dedicated squads that I get to work with that come from different teams. And when we work together in this dedicated squad, it means the depth of the relationships that I get to build with these different stakeholders over time can compound, basically. That's one of my favorite things. But not everybody works within a growth squad, and I know that. So if you're not within a squad and you're just within the design team as your main remit, how do you begin to think about this? Okay. There is a book from 37 Signals. It's written by Ryan Singers and it's called Shape Up, Stop Running in Circles, Shape the Work That Matters. And it talks about how as teams grow, the common problems is things like projects that continue to run on endlessly. And then there is a lack of time to think strategically about the product and you're not shipping at the speed that you used to in early days. And when this problem was framed, that statement was framed, I think what then stood out rather was the amount of processes that we oftentimes put in place to aid our work ending up being what impedes communication. So you get onboarded into a design team. This is our way of working. This is how we do things. And it's almost like you're getting into this box almost immediately,
Right.
where it's like, this is how it works here.
Yeah.
Find your own angle within the square.
Right. And if it doesn't say go out and reach out to someone off the team, you're never going to do it because you're not quote unquote supposed to. Yeah.
But then so it's like it's a mental block that we also then find a lot of designers sitting in, because it's like, okay, if this is the way things work in the team, I don't want to rock the boat by going out to do these things. But I want to tell you, first of all, free yourself off the shackle. That's one. Two, rocking the boat is oftentimes the way things get done.
Rock the damn boat. Rock the boat.
Okay. And like team growth is a very good thing. But one of the things that, so for example, when I joined where I currently work, one of the things I realized very quickly is that we had that same mentality of this is how things work. And what that meant was that we were unable to move past a certain group of people being the taskmasters, where they basically are the ones who split up the tasks for other people to pick up. Right. And would initially have this approach, which meant that designers, content designers, devs pick up work as it's assigned to them. Right. And we got to rock this boat immediately. Right. That's the first step. So I help to champion this sort of roundtable where first things first is, how do you begin to understand each of the stakeholders around this roundtable? How do we begin to include, because every single person here is an expert of their domain. That's why they're within this squad, right? But for you as a designer, if you are not within this squad level, it's also just recognizing the same thing works. Every single person within your company is a domain expert in a certain thing. Now, how does your work, the question I asked, how does your work ladder up into other teams? Because at some point, it would also come to you, no matter what the UX lead tells you, or the head designer or head of design tells you, like as regards what work comes, there are two things you need to be careful of or mindful of, is outcomes and outputs. So when you spend so much time staying within this box, you stay within the mindset of output. Yeah, of output. But then when you begin to rock the boat, you begin to realize that the priority are the outcomes, right? And that's one great way to begin to demonstrate your seniority. How are we thinking about the bigger picture that is not necessarily translated? How do I go from a forest to tree view and back again, right? And you get this by talking to the other people on the other team in the company. That is
Right.
the only
I
way to
love it.
do this, right?
Yeah.
And when you bring this perspective together, like, you know what, I know that the outline does sort of talk about what does relationship even mean? And I think this is a great
Yeah.
way to sort of segue
I was
into
just
that,
about to. Yeah, I was just about to. Go ahead. You
right?
did it for me. That's all good. I love it. Yeah, it's a perfect segue. I was about
Yeah.
to make the same segue. So yeah, go ahead.
I view relationships in the context of diplomacy. Blame this on my
Now,
yeah.
sorry, real quick before
Okay.
you hop into that, I do want to sort of just as I'm kind of thinking about this in my head, I do want to sort of make sure we highlight this piece. But I love, by the way, you mentioned the diplomacy piece because I often use the term politicking, but I think people kind of have a negative association with politicking, which is why I think diplomacy is a much nicer sounding word. But before we talk about relationships, something I've heard with a lot of people when they hear someone say you need to build relationships with your team, they think it's sort of like, oh, we need to go and I gotta get coffee with them, or I need to go to happy hours, or I need to make friends with them. And I don't think that's necessarily what we're talking. We're not talking about making friends. We're not talking about being buddies, and we're not talking about maybe not even like quid pro quo. You shake my hand, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
Mm.
Relationships are deeper than that, and it's a different thing. And I just want to sort of highlight that as you now go ahead, everything that you're talking about. I think it's just something worth highlighting because I've heard so many, especially junior designers that don't have a lot of professional experience building relationships. They say, I need to make friends with everybody. And it isn't about making friends. It's about just all the stuff you're going to talk about. So anyway, when we talk about relationships, I'll set it up. When we talk about relationships, tell me, like, what does that mean from you? I want to now go. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But.
No, that's okay. Two things, which I always use two things. First one is there are certain rules. Just speaking about that, we have to be friends at work, type of things. I don't have friends at work. I really don't. I have colleagues that I am friendly with, and we understand the context of our relationship. Now, sometimes, yes, that evolves into friendship outside of the workplace. Sometimes, but generally, as a context of work, I do not have friends. I just have friends that I'm colleagues that I'm friendly with, and when it's genuine relationship building, right? That's one. And then two, another fast rule that I use to sort of center how I view my relationships is because the context of saying friends at work also means that you are thinking about the informal relationships that you have in a professional setting, and you want to be careful of that, right? Which ties into my own the rule that I talked about, which is I am not nice, I'm kind.
I love that.
So those two qualifiers are how I view my work relationships. I am kind with my relationships, but I am not nice because I'm nice to my friends. That's friends outside of work. When we're at work, there are scenarios where the relationships demand or the context demands that we address things head on. And kindness is the rule that I base my communication in, not niceness, because niceness oftentimes hurts us, let's be honest, in the workplace. So we can get into that later. But then, yeah, relationships, I view this in the context of diplomacy completely. And I blame this completely on my international relations husband. But then it's just...
Was that what he does? Does he do this? Okay.
Yeah.
You got... Yeah, I love it.
He's currently a CEO, but then much of his background has come through like international relations and just diplomacy and things around that. And at the core of it, diplomacy works. Scratch that. It thrives on the network of quality relationships that have been built over time, which is why, like, if you were thinking about, and I blame this on also watching way too many of those diplomat shows, but then it's like, oh, there is a problem in this part of the world, but then for you to get that problem solved in this part, you can't go at it directly, and you've got to back channel on the quality of relationships you've got in 10,000 miles away in the other 5-6 directions, and somehow that links up into solving the problem in this geography of the world. That's the way I think about it sometimes. It's like a phone call here, a signal there, a distress call here, a celebration here. All of these things stack up eventually over time. The lessons stay the same. It's the genuine duty of care for people. You go beyond just the surface level chats, because if you're doing friends at work, oftentimes you begin to invite the unnecessary expectations about how these relationships need to be formed. No, we are here to work, but I can also get to know you. We are human. We are humane about the way we get to know each other. But beyond that, beyond understanding that your cat was sick and you had to take them to the vet, and I hope they're okay, there's a bigger one where it comes to their function at work, which is how do I get to know the pain points that they're focused on or concerned about hitting? Are there common threads between those pain points and the very same ones that I'm facing or I have to take care of? It's in those moments of talking through this that you will find the opportunities for growth or alignment between yourself and your stakeholders. So it's once again going back into turning your design thinking and empathy that we love to use on our customers so much inwards on your fellow colleagues and employees, and sometimes even your employer. That's
Yeah, I
what
love
we
that. I love that. And one of the things that, too, I just want to throw this out there and kind of talk about this for a minute. You mentioned it's not about being nice. And I think something that I have seen happen time and time and time again, you make friends with the people that you work with, maybe people directly in your team. And that's all great when things are well and good, right? But the problem comes when suddenly you have to have a really hard, tough conversation with that person. And if you're quote unquote friends with them, you might be more likely to avoid the conflict and sweep it under the rug. Or maybe they're doing something they're not supposed to and you don't feel comfortable bringing it up because you're quote unquote friends. So there's so many things that can happen. And I'm not saying don't be friends with your teammates, but I think it's worth understanding that there could be potential pitfalls, because that dynamic is not like, let's go to the bar, hang out and get drunk, and you're maybe play video games, whatever you do with your friends. It's a very different dynamic. And I love that you called out, I'm, not nice, I'm kind, because I think a lot of times people that are nice at work tend to be taken advantage of, and they tend to be the pushovers, and I'll just do it for you this time, or, oh, I'll help you. And they don't want to say no, that kind of stuff. So anyway, I love that you call that out, because I feel like that's just such an important thing to think about. And again, like relationships, we're not talking about like being nice to everybody and doing things for everybody and helping people constantly to the detriment of your own personal well-being and mental health and work-life balance and all that stuff. So anyway, I love that. Now, here's a question that I have for you.
Okay.
When you talk to most UX designers, you hear constantly just the strained relationship between stakeholders or product managers or whatever. And I think back to the Figma, was it the Figma conference, whatever, I can't remember the stupid name of the Figma conference, but Airbnb or whatever announced that they got rid of product managers and the whole audience erupted in cheers. It's like, that's just sort of it shows you like how fraught the relationship with designers and other important members of the team are. And I'm curious, why do you think this relationship is so painful for designers? Are they just not doing it right? Are we approaching the relationship wrong? Like, why do we have such a fraught relationship with people outside of the design team, from your perspective?
Oh my God. This one, I might get cancelled for a couple of things, but hey.
I won't cancel you.
Just kidding. But seriously, I invite designers to get over themselves. Step one. That's the first thing. And I say this with all the love and kindness in my heart. Genuinely, because I think that by nature, and especially because design is so subjective, we tend to be sensitive about our work and protective of it. And when I say I invite us to get over ourselves, it's that you need to that sensitivity around work is one thing that I hope more and more designers can embrace. And I used to be that. So I'm not saying this from a context of, oh yeah, this is me and I've got, no, I used to be that very person where it's like, you know what? If you give me that feedback and it hurts, oh my goodness. But then that's the point. Like our designs, yes, should not be torn apart and so many, but sometimes it's the reality of it. And it then brings us into context of language that we're very familiar with, which is what LinkedIn is rife with it these days, influence and stakeholders. But it's actually really true. I especially love this course from, first of all, a book, which I would recommend a lot. A book called Radical Candor. I forget her name right now, but that book was the turning point regarding communication for me, really, and how we evolve thinking about how we experience other people, and how, because we sometimes don't remember this, how other people experience us as well, which is also very important. Now, there's a course that I have on it's top there. I do want to take it at some points, but I followed their writing as a result of this. Sometimes I do this where I really try to read a lot of the free stuff first before actually jumping into the course.
It's a good idea.
This sort of helps me set the stage for like why our relationships can feel so painful. And it's this course from Satish Mumareddy. I will send the details to Jeremy.
Yeah, please do.
The first thing is understanding that we all have an influence style, whether you're intentional about it or you're just not noticing it. There is an influence style, whether it's great or bad. There is one. When you're intentional about it, what happens is that you naturally begin to up-level your skills around that style. And the kicker of this is you do not have to have authority to actually influence, right? So some scenarios in which this might be painful, right? And then I will sort of come back to some principles that I've sort of picked up from this writing and it's helped me. Oh, you know what? Let me talk about the principles first and then we'll talk about the scenarios. So first of all, for me, in my thinking, the company comes first. Like I said, that business empathy. And my default is then to assume that my colleagues are putting the company first as well. So basically, innocent until proven otherwise. That's the hard and fast rule. Unless your colleagues then show to you that they only have their best interests at heart and they're not working towards the company's goals, they're not working to the company's success. It's more just, hey, I'm here for me and that's the end. Until you can really hold them as that, it is that default assumption that we're all working towards a shared goal. How we go about it is different, yes, but that is the core of what brings us together. Now, that then leads into me putting in the work to understand the people around me and then adjust the influence models based on who I'm communicating with. The way I talk to the head of squad in the squad I work within right now is not the same way I speak with the data analyst in our squad. It's not the same way I address the PM within our squad. And this is where I go a step further. Might not be the case for everyone, but it does work, which is by understanding the different domains of the stakeholders, at least gain a working knowledge. I'm not saying you suddenly become an expert domain in every single thing. No, but gaining the working knowledge to be able to communicate to them in a context that you set up your work in a way they get it. It makes it easier for them to receive and experience you as a person, but also your work and helps you achieve the goal that you set out to achieve, which then helps us create this sense of shared ownership because we're using the language that includes them. It helps them to see the vision as clearly as I do and vice versa. Right. So if they're talking about certain deep things, I don't hesitate from asking the question, okay, I don't exactly understand how what you're describing aligns with the goal that I'm working together. Could you explain that to me? Taking that sense of humility, taking the time and approach for people to explain to you, be the learner, is also just as important. And then this helps us with one very important thing, which is we then can consistently set and manage the right level of expectations because our communication is aligned. So for me, what that shows up in practice as is one, I design in public. I've removed the cloak around my work. My colleagues know when it is in iteration phase. I know we have this back and forth about people being in Figma, but I've recently gotten very comfortable with it. Stakeholders, I know when they're having meetings talking about my work because all of them are in my Figma files and I'm working. And if it's a day that I really want heads down work, I've communicated to them that I'm happy for you to see my work. But if I shake my mouse very sharply and you see me dancing, I'm in focus mode and you're distracted. So there's these cues we've communicated and they know that, right? But then by sharing my iterations, sharing it early, sharing it often, I'm able to get context that eventually influences the final solution that we come up with, that everyone does feel included to a certain degree. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm now asking for their opinion on every design decision. No, that's not it. It's that business context that I may not be fully aware of. It's that market understanding that I may not necessarily have, when they bring all of these thoughts together, and it's like, all right, this is first iteration. It's early. Can I get you 15 minutes of your time? We get into Figma and they're rapidly thinking, all right, but are we thinking about this problem? So the question is not, or the conversation is not, oh, how about you had a button there and added? No, that is not entertained at all. It's more the question of, are you thinking about how this solves for XYZ? And then I can repeat to them and say, oh, that's a very good call out. If we're trying to solve for XYZ, perhaps the design decision I need to be making is to include this design function here and this. I'm the one who makes that recommendation. And they've come to trust me because I've invited them into my process, right? But the bottom line for this is I can continue to grow my interpersonal skills, my emotional intelligence, and just general positive intelligence regarding how different people work, so that when it's time to have a difficult conversation that will result in a positive outcome, I've already established a rapport. They can
Exactly.
trust my judgment
Exactly.
when I say sharply to them, that is a great opinion to have, but that context doesn't work for our users. They can trust my thinking because they already know what that thinking looks like, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So
I love that. No, that's amazing. Well, something I want to go back to this. I think this is the most critical part that you said, and you just mentioned it in passing. So I want to highlight it. We have to get over ourselves. We have to get over ourselves. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to designers that think design is the most integral linchpin. It's the most important piece of the team. And if there's no designers, the company's going to go bankrupt and blah. That's bullshit. Those people will build their software and they will release it, and it might not look pretty and it might not be as usable as possible, but it will work and they could survive without you. I promise. They might not make as much money, but they're going to, so something that I think is, and I hate to use sports analogies, but I think this fits perfectly here. But I say this all the time. Great design, great software, not even design, great software is a team sport. Building great software is a team sport. And when you think about teams, the reason why I like this analogy, I use baseball because I don't really know much about sports. And I don't know how much, I don't know, baseball is probably not huge in Europe like it is in the United States. I would use football or soccer, but I don't know anything about soccer. So, but you've got everybody on the team has a position, right? You've got a pitcher, you got a catcher, you got a first base, second base, third base, outfield. Nobody is more important than the others. If you don't have a second baseman, your team's going to probably not do very well. If you don't have a pitcher, it doesn't matter how good your pitcher is. If you don't have a second baseman, you're probably not going to do great, right? So everybody has a position and nobody is more important than the other people on the team. And for some reason, designers think, a great example, problem solver. I'm a problem solver. The product manager isn't a problem solver. Do you think the CEO thinks he's not solving problems? Do you think the software engineers think they're not solving problems? It's such an asinine thing. I hear people say it all the time. Oh, why'd you get into UX design? Well, I like to solve problems. All right, well, why didn't you become a software engineer? You could have solved problems as a software engineer. So anyway, that's just something I think we have this hubris about us that design. And the other thing too, I had a great conversation recently with Ricardo Brito about how we need to get over the title of design. So what if your title's not design? So what, so I think there's just so much there to just we could probably have a whole conversation just about this, but I think you can't do the other things that you're talking about without getting over yourself. You can't approach a stakeholder thinking you're better than them. You're smarter than them. You know more about you're a dumb stakeholder. I do not possibly pick my design over whatever, Stakeholders are just as smart as you. They know just as much, if not more, about things. But you know more about things than they do in other areas. So, I love that because to me, that is the thing I see most people that struggle with relationships with their product manager, stakeholders, whatever, they approach it from a place of, I'm better than you. I know more than you. I'm smarter than you. You're just a stupid product manager in my way. Let me do my job. And to me, that's just such an integral piece of all of this. You can't learn about the business if you don't get past it. You can't have a relationship with your team. You don't get past that. And to me, that's just something that I think is so important. We are not the most important part of the team. Everybody shares responsibility for building great software, and design is just one position out of all the positions that we need. So I don't know if you have any other thoughts about that, but that's just, to me, is something I see constantly, and it drives me freaking crazy.
Absolutely. Get over yourself. It's why I invited everyone to do that in the beginning, right? Design is not the most important. Like we've established, there are businesses where I mean, there are some. I know Lenny's podcast. He published some detail about how long different businesses went before they hired their first designer. It was incredible to see the data. Like there are businesses that went on 3, 4, 5 years before design was even introduced. It was just the dev and the sales people and things like that. Like I'm not saying those functions are more important than design is. What I'm saying is that unless you kill your ego around your importance, you are unable to adequately take in opinions of others in a way that will impact the bottom line you're working towards, right? So I hold opinions, like it's strong opinions, held lightly, held loosely. That's
Yeah,
my
I love
own
that.
pattern with this, right? And ultimately, I think, so for example, in the school that I work in, I think immediately to this incredibly brilliant human. I mean, her IQ is ridiculous. She's got 2 PhDs, and not just in anything, in mathematics and something ridiculously amazing. I go through conversations with her, and it's so easy. Also, because English is not her first language, I see how it could be very easy for someone to discount her as an
Yeah,
important
yeah.
stakeholder. But that's one of the most important relationships I have right now within Discord. She's one person that I'm constantly leaning on and saying, hey, I need your analyst brain on how I've thought about the solution from a business perspective, right? It works for the customers. There are things I've ticked off in my head. It's sort of like going through for the business, but are there deeper things that you are thinking longer term? I don't have that overview. You are able to bring that perspective. And many times, yes, that's the context she brings in. First of all, affirms and says, yes, you've done the work with this, great job. But then, what if this scenario 5 years down the line, when we've expanded our product suite to this, and I'm just every time I just look at her like, great, thanks.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
can't have those kind of experiences if you've spent so much time just sitting on your high horse, really. And honestly, yeah, sort of go back to what we talked about, the different scenarios where relationships can feel difficult for us. So, first of all, it's this mindset around how we pitch ideas. Right? When we pitch ideas, we think, and I say we because once again, I've been there, done that, thought I was the best thing after sliced bread, the gift to the business as a designer. Um,
As
and
most designers tend to think about themselves. Yep.
exactly. And then you're here thinking about this amazing, incredible, fantastic silver bullet idea. And you think that when you pitch it, it should be home run. Yay, amazing. And that moment of inspiration gets rejected in 5 ways till Sunday. And it just becomes an intense frustration, right? But then here's the thing, there is a huge difference in how you propose an idea and how people receive it. And we're oftentimes so focused on how we proposed it that we forget that the interpretation and reception of communication in any form is based on people's backgrounds, their knowledge, their expertise, their upbringing, the rose-colored lens they might be looking through things, right? And you're thinking like, oh, here is my incredibly amazing idea. I think this will be fantastic. Someone is seeing immediately how that affects their work significantly, how that idea adds to their workload, which means they're not able to hit XYZ targets, or perhaps they've even tried that idea before and now you're wasting their time suggesting it. Or they just feel like, okay, great, it's a great idea, but I have got other senior like more important priorities. There's so many reasons why people may not receive it the way. So when you think about how to have influence, it takes thoughtful planning, which is why I prioritize one-to-ones before I
Yeah.
suggest ideas. Right?
I love
My
it.
one-to-ones are the most powerful ways in which I go about influencing. And one-to-ones go beyond your managers or direct reports. No, that is just one way. When I spend time dedicated time thinking deeply about a topic, about an idea, and what I can then go into these conversations is to let other people provide the sounding board with more comprehensive aspects of making that decision. They are able to share their almost reactive or intuitive point of view with me, right? They get this information, they share the perspective. Now, in this conversation, they're able to either, like, there's a chance for me to either help them rethink their point of view or they change their mind. And it's a safe space because it's just us.
Right.
And
I love that so
ultimately,
much.
ultimately, because now I've got all these one-to-ones with all of these stakeholders in a week. I spend my week in one-to-ones. In a week, I probably have 67 one-to-ones with my
Yeah.
different stakeholders, right? Because when we then come to the strategic level where we're all meeting, I've spent that time sort of taking, there's a technique that's when it comes to like changing somebody's mind, where it's more about, there's a technique rebuttal. I learned this from Satish once again, or a topic rebuttal. So basically what this is, that when someone disagrees with our opinion on something, we immediately try to change their mind by sharing a bunch of facts that prove that we're right and they're wrong, right? This is like topic. It's based on the topic. And it generally doesn't work, because it just makes that person dig into their position and like, oh, now you want to prove I'm wrong? I will show you who's wrong, right?
Yeah.
But then, if you think about it as a technique rebuttal, in this one, you're getting people to articulate their rationale for why their conclusions are the way they are, but then they're evaluating it themselves in a very non-judgmental way. And this is how you do it. Once
Just
you've
ask them
been able
questions
to
about it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love it.
First of all, assure them that you understand what they are talking about, their perspective. And if you don't, ask the questions, make sure you understand it, right? You just want to explore the underlying rationale for that thought process. Now, establish that baseline. Ask them how they feel strongly about this issue on a scale of 1 to 10. And then ask them what the reasoning is for that rating that they've given. But listen to this reasoning and repeat it back to them in their own terminology. This confirms to them mentally that you understand the things they're saying. Now follow it up with a personal experience. Have they got any personal experiences with this issue at hand that they can share with you? And then you can sort of collaborate, like see how in your personal stories, I found something that sort of aligns with that, right? You're not arguing about their point of view. And then you sort of ask for a final rating and thank them for this. This works because ultimately, when people have been able to rate over a few points, they can begin to see through your personal story, through your rating as well, because you're feeding that back to them. They can begin to see how perhaps there are points from what you've made that can help enhance, not change, enhance the point of view that they hold, right? And this works because the human mind is like, we all have this model of the world that is updated through small iterations, or it's either small iterations or massive paradigm shifts, right? So you have to, and when you're bringing an idea in a group setting, you're asking for a big paradigm shift oftentimes, right? But how do we switch that into small little bits? It needs time to go from its current model to then update itself, to then feel right again, and then update itself. Just think about that like a software, right? And
Yeah.
we also take shortcuts when it comes to making decisions and having opinions, right? So we rely on assumptions, bits of information on people around us, media that we consume, and all of these things without having thoroughly thought through things. We all like to think we're deep thinkers, but many times that's how decisions get made in our head. Really?
Yeah,
But when you
absolutely.
give someone that space, that psychological safety, it sort of gives them time to feel like they've now thought through this rationally and rigorously, and they are now making a much more informed decision. In practical terms, with everything I just said, we've had this sort of internal debate back and forth when it comes to that access to dev time and things like that on the team. And for me, I first of all thought like, no, I can't work without devs. Why does this work? Where are you guys from? That was my knee-jerk reaction. But then I thought, you know what, this can drag on for a long time and they'd be valid because that's the way the entire company works. It's not just about me now. So what's the best way for me to reach my decision, reach my solution, but in a way that benefits us all? I reached out to the engineering manager to sort of hear the thoughts. Hey, you've been here for 5-6 years. What's your take on this? And they're like, we would love it, but we also understand that engineering time is precious and the resources are limited. That having access to every designer having access to them would also take that away. So I'm used to a system where devs, I bring them in my early iteration. I can get the feasibility and viability quickly and keep it moving, right? But that won't work in this scenario because, once again, very small team catering to lots of other teams. So, hey, can I then figure out between you and I, can we figure out what might be a great idea? What if we sort of take, instead, we're not changing that process, we're just instituting one more meeting ahead of that, where you and I on a high level can hash out all of these details before it becomes a proper ticket down the line. And
Yeah.
by the time
I
we were
love that.
done, it was an idea they began to just evangelize and run with, even bigger than I could have gone. Because also they're a manager. I'm not. I'm an IC, right? And by being non-judgmental and letting the other person also think, let people think, it makes it easier for us all to actually just make decisions that we can all feel confident in, that we contributed to in a very solid way.
Yeah, I love that. It's like you're in my head. You're in my head. Get out of my head. Yeah, I mean, I talk about, so I've just had this book and about basically a lot of this stuff, and I just stress the importance of one-on-ones, 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 one-on-ones. It is, if you're running into any issues on your team, whether that's interpersonal relationships or strategy relationships or complexity problems, or whether it's strategy or complexity or interpersonal relationships or whatever, one-on-ones. That is always where I start. It is the first place I start, and it is a great place because, like you said, it's just the two of you. You are not going to come to a decision in a meeting with 40 people in an hour on Zoom. It is just not going to happen. I promise. You've got to, like, I hate to use the term divide and conquer, but breaking those things up and talking to people individually and understanding perspectives, and then you become the glue that either figures out how to thread all the issues together, or you come up with an idea, or you introduce someone else or something, and you put two people together that can figure that thing out. One-on-ones, they are the perfect place to start. And you brought up this idea, though, of trying to influence and having a presentation and it doesn't go your way. If you have this, I call it the big reveal meeting. The big reveal, you spent months designing the perfect solution, and the big reveal, and the stakeholders hate it. That's your fault. That is your fault, because you should have been talking to people, and let's face it, sometimes you can't get access to those important C-level executives or whatever, but you got access to people who have presented to them before. You have access to people who know them, who know what they think, who know what they might want, who know what they prefer, who know how they like to be communicated to. They want less data, more data. They want more stats, less stats. They want visuals, they blah, 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 whatever. That's your job, to figure out those things so that when you get into that meeting, it's not a shock. It's not a shock. All those people in the meeting should have informed that presentation. And you could talk about how big of a waste of time it is to have a meeting about a meeting about a meeting. But if you try to do that big reveal, and just like you say, go off in your corner and design a thing, you are going to fail. And I have experienced that. I talk about in my book a specific example of how it's a huge thing. We did exactly that, and it was a failure. And looking back on it, the way that I would have changed it would have been more one-on-ones with important people and people who know important people and understand. Because they would have said, you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
That idea is never going to fly. I don't care how good you think it is. It's not going to work. And we would have saved everybody a ton of time, or we could have come up with a different idea that would have been accepted by those important stakeholders. Yeah. And so, for me, the one-on-ones, they're so important, And then the other thing that you mentioned a little bit earlier, I think is just worth highlighting before we get out of here, letting them in and letting them think it's their idea. We talk about cognitive biases and things like that. This is why I do the cognition catalog every Friday, because working with your team is so important, and you have to understand how people think. But something like the IKEA effect, for instance, right? If they're involved with it, they think it's their idea, it's our idea. I don't have to convince them of anything because they helped come up with the idea to begin with. So, it's just such an important thing, and we get so wrapped up in this idea that we have all the solutions and no one else can possibly come up with the ideas like we can. We're just doing ourselves a disservice, but at the end of the day, we're doing the users a disservice, because the business is going to build some crap. And if we don't have that input on what users need and want, they're going to be unhappy. And then obviously an unhappy user doesn't want to pay, and the business suffers. So anyway, I don't know. That's just I want to highlight all that. The one-on-ones, God, I just cannot stress how important one-on-ones.
Honestly, and if you flip this around and think about it in the context of like new teams, new workplaces and things like that, it's the same idea that will get you established, the same one-on-ones. And it's not a once-off, because then people do, oh yeah, I've talked to done one round with like 30 people across the business. Great. No, this is where a stakeholders map is important. And that's one thing I like to do whenever I start a new role. I have literally a blown up on my computer, understanding of different people within the business, understanding who are the true influencers, who are the people that, I was reading a book where it was like, they realized very quickly that every time the VP of whatnot wanted to make a decision, there was a slight head tilt and a glance to a certain member of the team before they shared their thoughts. And by that bodily interaction, you immediately know that that's the person who holds sway, even though they
Yeah,
may not have the title, right? So it's
exactly.
understanding who are the influencers really, who are the people who get things done and get decisions through the pipe, right? But then ultimately, it's almost like also figure out how to show instead of just telling, right? When I started my role, like I said, the concept of a growth product designer was not something they were very familiar with, right? And we had all of these details. What I did in my one-to-ones was use a lot of micro feedbacks that I documented extensively. So hey, here are a few things I've been noticing since just it's early days. I'm talking to a bunch of people. I've noticed XYZ. You've been here for a while. This is your area. Can you share some feedback on how ideas could come through for improvement and who the right person is to talk to? And I still use this till today. I've been there now a much longer time, but I use this with my manager. I use this with my peers. I use this with directors and execs. Ultimately, it's like, hey, I've got this thought, or hey, I've noticed this issue. Hey, I'm looking into this. This is more your domain. This is where you have oversight and expertise. Who should I be talking to? What is your feedback on this? Have you got thoughts? Is this something you've tried to sort of take care of in the past and you did not get through with it? What were the issues you ran into? What heads up do I need to have? Right? These feedback ultimately help strengthen you, your point of view, your thought process. Because what happens when you've got an idea or a thought is that there are gaps. There are open questions that have not been thought through. There are legitimate concerns that have not yet been addressed. Finding the other smart, because your business is not employing silly people, smart people in the business
Yeah, yeah.
helps identify all these ways. But then, by continually doing these one-to-ones, you begin to find your collaborators along the way. People get genuinely excited and they want to work with you. You bring them in
Yes.
on it. You make it a shared ownership, right? It then means that these people are in your corner when it's time for all the tough conversations and decisions that need to be made. You find who is the right person to sponsor these ideas, who will get this through all the way up on your behalf
Yeah,
in rooms you don't have access to. Right?
I love
So,
it.
yeah, those are some of the things that, especially when you're new in a company, one-to-ones are very strategic for establishing yourself as well.
I love it. And something I often say to sort of summarize everything is it's you know, the relationships are critical, and the reason why they're so important is they make great relationships make the hard conversations later easier. And that is something, you're going to have hard conversations. We're building software. It's hard. It's not easy, and it's often harder because of the people.
Yes.
Not to say building software is easy, writing code is not easy, but it's really hard because of the people. And so those relationships, it's so important. And when we talk about the overall importance of quote unquote learning the business, that's exactly how you do it. I love it. So this has been an amazing conversation. I was nodding along the whole time. I'm like, yes, preach, yes. And this is stuff I say constantly, and I love that. Makes me feel good that other people are saying the same thing. I think it's so important. So ԻníOlúwa, we got some questions that we like to ask all our guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. 5 simple questions. First thing that comes to your mind. You don't have to think too hard about it. Are you ready to get started?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. First up, what is your favorite non-design?
Oh my God, I have way too many, Jeremy. Okay, so I will give you 4.
4. It's my show. You're allowed.
All right. So first one is the visual MBA, and I think this also just reflects the space of learning that I'm currently in. So I'm in a design MBA, the last cohort of 2024. I'm having so much fun with it. But this visual MBA is so good because it basically is a visual guide for us designers in understanding all these very big terms that it's like, oh, what are they talking about? And it flies over your head. It's basically a quick guide to everything you will learn in 2 years of business school, broken down into a visual way. And if you prefer to read, you can then get the personal MBA. That's another alternative to it. But those 2 books are really great for sort of getting that foundational knowledge and understanding from a business perspective, so to speak. Now, number 2 is Likeable Badass. I just picked up this book. It's How Women Get the Success They Deserve. It's written by Alison Fragale. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. I hope that's the right way. It's just such a great. I am enjoying reading more and more books that are written by women in corporate, in in just helping other women begin to understand. The title feels very flowery, like likable badass, but I think at the core of it, it's actually it's an important nod to how to balance what I said about I am not nice at work, I am kind. How do you find that balance in a way that it's more, you're not a doormat and people walking all over you, but you're still able to find that rapport and build that consistent relationships around tough decisions, tough conversations, and things like that. Then I love Lift As You Climb by Viv Groskop. It is a nice reminder of us just being able to reflect on where we're coming from, but more importantly, how we're setting things up for other people coming after us. And finally, it's not a design book, but very related to design psychology, Hooked by Nir Eyal.
Yeah. That's a good one. Do I have that one on mine? I thought I had
You
that
do?
one. I feel like it's on the list of like every UX designer's must read books. Yeah, I thought I had it. It's on a different bookshelf. It's not right here, but yeah, I've got that one too. That's a good book. That's a really good book. All right, those are good books. Likeable Badass. I need to read that one. I know it's like about how women get the success they deserve. I feel like a lot of men could probably read that as well and get a lot out of it. So
honestly, one thing that immediately comes to mind when I read it was talking about how in the workplace, there are two things you sort of have to figure out where you fall into: status or power. Status being how people perceive you, relationships and all these things. Power being the resources and authority to actually get things done. So which one are you? And I'm like,
I love
that. I'll be both.
Yeah. You can't do both? God, I can't do a little both. I guess you gotta pick one or the other. All right. What is your favorite non-design podcast?
That's easy. Working Hard, Hardly Working. It is by this incredible young CEO, Grace Beverly. And what she's built is just completely mind-blowing. She's got like 4 or 5 businesses at this point. Started super early, so I guess I can relate on that. But I love that the podcast just touches on all sorts of things, from women's health to men's health to societal issues to actually things about working in corporate to interviewing top CEOs. It's incredible. Love the breadth of it.
All right, I have to check. I've never heard of that one.
Yeah.
I love asking everybody these things because most of the time they answer stuff I've never heard of before. All right. Next up, what is your favorite meal? Now, this could be something you've cooked, something you had a restaurant. You've lived in a bunch of places, so you've had some interesting meals. What you got?
My roots are very Nigerian with this. I love a smoky party jollof rice. I give it to me hot piping with plantains, peppered snails, and pomo. Pomo is basically cowhide that's been cooked and put in a lot of stew, and it's just very sumptuous and soft.
Right on. Okay, I've never heard of that. So snails, like, is that sort of like escargot, kind of like in France?
No,
I don't know.
so it's not. It's much larger. So we have really massive snails back home, like fist massive size.
Oh my God. Okay.
I know. Then they're just really cooked for a long period till they soften, and you roll them in like tomato sauce and with like spices and
Wow, that's unique. I've never heard of that before, but I'll check that out. Cowhide too. Okay, interesting. Yeah, I can't even like picture with it. Is it like cut up or is it like big? Are the snails like big
like that?
Do you eat them out of the shell, or do you? Are they taken out of the shell?
It's already been taken out of the shell, cleaned, and all of that. Yeah.
All right, I have to check that out. That's so cool. I've never heard of that dish before. All right, what is your favorite vacation spot?
Central Portugal. So, my husband and I, we've been married now about 7 years. But when we did get married initially, we did not have like a honeymoon, so it's been a deferred honeymoon, and we went last year, to Portugal. And it was Lisbon we stayed in for much of the time, but we took like a day trip to this Central, and it was just so breathtaking. We just walked around, lovely air, sea air, clean mountain air, just took pictures, ate. It was just great. Loved it.
I've only been to Europe for work. I've never been to Europe for like fun.
You know how
there's like so many cool places. Well, Africa's similar too, right? Where, I mean, there's just so many little countries that are all together, and every country has its own unique kind of character. I mean, obviously, like Morocco is not at all like South Africa, and everything in between is just completely unique.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just love that. And it's like I'm in the United States, and it's like, Mississippi versus New York are very different, sure, but it's still, we're pretty much, you can find a McDonald's, use the same money, the language it depends on where you go in Mississippi, I guess. But for the most part, it's all so similar. But I love that so much. I'm so jealous. All right, last question. What is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
This was a tough one, but I found it in the end. So Visual Electric, I've sort of checked them out a long time ago, but then I got really hooked into Midjourney and learned all of my Midjourney prompts and whatnot. It's really awesome tool, but I'm going back. I find myself going back to Visual Electric these days, mostly from a brand design perspective, because it was created by designers for designers. So the imagery is
I've never heard of Visual Electric. I've never heard of it.
It is good. You should check it out. It's like, I don't know how they've managed to eliminate that AI feel to the images. And I've seen mock-ups people have created. It's high quality stuff. It's incredible.
Wow.
It is.
All right, I'll check it out.
Yeah, and I also love Jita. Jita, I use it mostly for like video, motion design. It's absolutely lovely. And then a recent obsession, I've just downloaded it on my computer and started playing with it, is Play. And it's more exploring interaction design. I've seen the madness people are creating with this tool, and I'm just like, I want in on that.
Yeah. Yeah, Jitter is really cool. I've seen a lot of people doing some awesome stuff with it. I feel so old school though. Like I'm just still like, I don't know. I feel like an old man. I'm like, kids today, let them come in and do all the cool fancy stuff, and I'll just like lead strategy or something. I'll tell them what to do. All right. So ԻníOlúwa, this has been an amazing conversation. One of the most important, I think, I'm going to say this, one of the most important conversations I think I've had on the show, maybe ever. This is just such an important one. Relationships lead to your understanding of the business. If you don't understand that stuff, I don't know how you could possibly do your job well, honestly. I don't care if you're a junior designer just starting out, leading design teams, all that stuff. This is just such an important conversation. Before we get out of here, tell everybody where they can find you. Give all your stuff a plug. You got a podcast. Tell us about the podcast. Tell us where they can find you and all that stuff.
Let's do it. So you can find me on LinkedIn. My name is ԻníOlúwa Abíódún, spelled as INIOLUWA ABIODUN. If you search that, you will find me. And mine is the profile with the lots of, I put my intonations, the intonation marks on my name on LinkedIn. So there is that. You can also find me on Instagram. It's ini.abiodun. I share a mix of my interests, like my illustrations, my work, my life. I completely use Insta stories to be just fooling around on the internet about life in general, ranting. So if you want to have fun and see that side of me, then Instagram is a place to go. And then I have a website. It's currently still going, it's going through construction. It's iniabiodun.com, but I will release it very soon. I've just been doing a lot of writing, and I want to pivot from like a personal portfolio to more of my writing and thoughts on the internet. And then for the podcast, yes, I co-host the Growth Design Podcast, and you can find us on growthdesignpod.com or on Spotify. We are the Growth Design Podcast, yes, and on YouTube as well. So please absolutely subscribe. We have really great, we're wrapping up actually our drops for the year, so nearly done, but we have so many great episodes. If you're curious about growth design, on that understanding of business design, intersection of psychology and economics, I think it's a great podcast to subscribe to and follow along.
Hell yeah, I totally agree. It's a good one. And thank you again for coming on. This has been, like I said, such an important conversation. I am so excited to get this one out there. For anybody listening, if you are not having one-on-ones with the people outside of your direct team, for the love of God, start now. Do it now. I want you to put the damn phone down. Go open up Teams or Outlook or whatever, Slack, whatever you use, and find your stakeholders, send them a message, and tell them you want to have a one-on-one. I promise you will not regret it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again for coming on. This has been fantastic.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you so much.